Um, Last week, I wrote a column that was built around a report of which Bob Pollin was the principal author, uh, released by the University of Massachusetts Amherst Political Economy Research Institute. And the report is on a proposed clean energy transition program for West Virginia. It's one of several reports that basically provide a template for how to redevelop West Virginia or Ohio or Pennsylvania based on combining an energy transition with an economic development program and a land reclamation program and a public health program that also produces good jobs, a new strategy of development for a state that has traditionally been built around fossil fuels, as well as a just transition for former fossil fuel workers. So, um, Bob, could you give us a summary of the thinking behind this report and the logic of how the various pieces of the strategy fit together?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. So the first big component of the report is for West Virginia, like the rest of the US and the rest of the world, to achieve the emission reduction target set out by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. The intermediate target is a 45% reduction in CO2 emissions by 2030, which is now only 9 years from now. So the first feature of the program, which is an investment program, building up clean energy in West Virginia and winding down fossil fuel consumption by approximately 50%. So the question then is, how much investment, how much spending will it take to get there? And then when we do those investments, how many jobs do we create? So that's the first component. The second is based around this Reimagine Appalachia program that people have been developing now for several years in the region. Basically, they were the clients that commissioned me to do this report in the first place. So that is focused around infrastructure, reviving manufacturing, agricultural regeneration, land reclamation, improving agriculture conditions. So that's the second component of the investment program. And that one, then also we model that and then we estimate the job creation from that. So you put those two things together and you're looking at about $5 billion a year, $6 billion a year, about $5 billion a year. And then we get the job estimates and we come out at about 41,000 jobs total. And then the third big feature is then, okay, what about the fossil fuel industry? So the fossil fuel industry has been the major employer of the state, but it's been in decline for a long time. There are about 41,000 people employed in the region, not just in coal and oil, but in anything to do with it, transportation, pipelines, anything. So then we say, okay, if we're going to cut it back by 50% by 2030, that means we're going to cut 50% of the jobs approximately. But then we say, okay, look, it's a 10-year transition to 2030. So there's 40,000 roughly jobs, 20,000 jobs are going to be cut, 2,000 jobs per year if you do this rationally. Now, on top of the 2,000 per year, about 600 people we think will retire voluntarily because they're going to turn 65. So that's 1,400 jobs per year of workers that we need to find new jobs for. And we match that against the roughly 40,000 jobs per year we're creating by building the clean energy and strong infrastructure and agricultural revival economy. That's basically it.
Lots of questions. One of the things I found interesting was that if you create new jobs and pension off some of the older workers, you're talking about a net cost of, I think, what, $161 million?
I think it was 126. Yeah,
126.
yeah, yeah.
Dyslexia. 126 million. So, in the context of a infrastructure bill of something like $2 trillion, that's not a huge chunk of money. Even in the context of a West Virginia redevelopment program of $6 billion, it's not a huge chunk of money. Who would come up with that money? It's still money that somebody needs to come up with.
Yeah. So yeah, the way we get the 126 million is we look at those 1,400 workers per year, and then we assume a job guarantee. So it doesn't have to be in the clean energy, but that's an obvious place to move people. But we assume that their wages are going to stay at least as good. We guarantee their wages. And the wages are higher. The fossil fuel job wages are higher than the clean energy wages. That's the way it is now. So we say we're going to guarantee their wages. Then we guarantee their pensions, and we support them with retraining as needed and relocation as needed, though our client was pretty insistent that we don't want people to have to relocate. We want new investments right in the state. People can stay where they are. Okay, so that gets us to $126 million per year, and that's equal to 0.02% of GDP of West Virginia. So it's peanuts, but yes, it's still $126 million. Where do you get that? Well, the Biden, at least in his campaign, was describing the so-called Build Back Better program that was an infrastructure, clean energy program for the entire country. And if you just let West Virginia get its share of the Build Back Better program based on its population, strictly on population, they would get $2.5 billion a year. I've estimated that the entire program that we're talking about would require about $2 billion in public funds and about $3 billion in private investments to combine. So that's, that if anything like what Biden is talking about passes, West Virginia should at least get $2.5 billion. I mean, they have a strong case that they should get a higher proportion because they're going to be disproportionately hurt by this transition. In fact, there's this other proposal out by 100 Congress people have endorsed called Thrive, which is a similar kind of program, investment, clean energy. Under the Thrive program, West Virginia would get about $4.5 billion per year. So somewhere between Biden and Thrive, West Virginia is going to get in the range of $2 to $3 billion. And I'm saying that's enough. That's more than enough to cover the whole program.
Probably also going to get a Joe Manchin bonus. So the practical question then is who actually carries this out? You've got a state with, Republican governor, Republican legislature, a state that's not famous for economic planning. So what mix of federal and state planning do you imagine would be necessary to actually make this happen?
So, I'm not that familiar with the ins and outs, but I've gotten to be just recently since we've been putting this out. And I've had meetings with some delegates, state delegates. I had meetings with members of Manchin's staff, and I was surprised by how enthusiastic they seemed. I was told that they might be hostile, but they weren't. Maybe they were just being polite. But anyway, we had a very constructive discussion, and they said they wanted to follow up. The delegates that I've talked to, same thing. So one thing that's been clear in talking with the NGO people who commissioned me and the delegates, they want to take ownership of this. They don't. On the one hand, they hire this outsider from Massachusetts to write this thing. On the other hand, they said, this is our program. And of course, they will shape it in exactly the way they want. They're tired of Washington and other people telling them how to do things. So that was a clear message. On the other hand, I mean, of course, they're going to want to take the money from this Biden program or some whatever variation comes out. I was actually impressed by the quality of the people, their commitment. And when we did our press meeting exactly a week ago today, the head of the AFL-CIO in the state was on. This particular delegate was on. The mayor of one of the major cities was on. And they, I think if anybody can see that West Virginia doesn't have a future by trying to cling to coal. They do have a future. They could have a bright future by pursuing something like this. And this was the message that these leaders, the labor leader, this delegate, and the mayor were talking about. And then with Manchin's staff, I see this as a fantastic opportunity for Manchin, especially like in his moment of extreme leverage in Washington. He can say, well, sure, we need this. And yes, West Virginia should get a disproportionate share.
Now, to what extent does this need to be carried out by the state government, and to what extent can it be done by this consortium of local governments, NGOs, economic development specialists, with or without the active participation of the state government?
I mean, I think you need the state government because, the way I've designed it, at least, 60% of the total funding is coming from private. And so in order to induce the private sector, you've got to have incentives and disincentives. So, we need some basic policy levers here that can only happen at the state level. For example, renewable portfolio standards. So you say, the utilities have to cut their fossil fuel consumption 5% a year, or else, you're paying $10 million fine or you go to jail. That's a big one. Or you could have a carbon tax or some combination of the two. We should have energy efficiency standards in buildings. They've got to start, the government should buy the electric vehicles. All of these things need to come together. And I don't think those can come together at the level of municipalities.
Now, is that thinkable with the current government of West Virginia, even given a 2.5 or $3 billion a year federal carrot?
I don't know. I think that what I was on a call just a few hours ago, and what the person told me, true from one of the NGOs, but he said there's never been any enthusiasm like this ever, and that the fact that this is a live idea, and your article helped to thank you. It's really making it come alive, and who knows what Senator Manchin's thinking. But I mean, the way you framed it, like so clearly, like this is the opportunity for this senator, it's kind of obvious when you lay it out. So I think that, the people on the ground think this could be a live possibility. Why wouldn't they want to do it? I mean, the only other option is to say, well, we have to keep fighting for coal. But they know that's a losing option, even without more severe regulations. As it is, coal has been declining. Coal can't compete with natural gas as it is. And they're talking about carbon capture technology, which would enable them to keep burning coal, and then it gets captured and stored. Well, the latest report from the Department of Energy, and this had to have come while Trump was still in office, it just came out a couple of weeks ago. Carbon capture, the Energy Department is estimating, is twice as expensive as solar, twice as expensive as wind. So why would the state, and it's not proven at commercial scale. So why would the state want to gamble on that instead of embracing this opportunity?
um, thinking about this, let's assume that Biden gets his green transition slash infrastructure program, and let's assume that it's at the order of magnitude he was talking about during the campaign, which I think is what, 500 billion a year for 4 years.
4 years, yeah.
Yeah, $2 trillion. Now, um, the last time the United States engaged in a serious act of economic planning was during World War II. Since World War II, we've had a kind of a medley of a little bit of economic development over here, and a little bit of worker training over there, and a little bit of Pentagon spin-off over here. But economic planning has been so anathema in this country that uh, government involvement in the planning of the economy is kind of piecemeal. It moves in fits and starts. And this is an opportunity to get serious about economic planning. And if you look at uh, the development of the Biden Build Back Better program as they're turning it into legislation, and you look at who's actually likely to implement this, and Biden is meeting with people on the Hill this week, um, what you see is so far uh, a little bit of a crazy quilt in that um, Buttigieg, as Secretary of Transportation, has a piece of it, and the various energy and environment people have a piece of it. Department of Interior has a piece of it. Um, can you and I guess National Economic Council sort of kind of maybe coordinates it, although that nobody has really been appointed infrastructure czar. And so this is kind of a black box. And I don't know a hell heck of a lot about it because I don't think they do yet. But as somebody who's a serious economist and serious about economic planning, how would you imagine this might go forward at the federal level?
Well, yes. I mean, first of all, we have to have a bill. They still haven't even produced a serious bill. And secondly, I just, okay, thinking now in terms of the economics and implementing something, I think it would be really valuable for people to absorb the idea that the basics are simple. Um, and let's think about what are the basic goals and not think, at least at first, let's not think about all the agencies and what the various agencies are going to do. And then also let's not think about what all the acronyms are going to be for the 83 specific programs, because I myself get confused. I mean, just reading the Build Back Better program, like that it was online when Biden was running, I mean, it took me a while to actually really absorb what it was, because it was all, as you said, it was piecemeal. There's all these programs with names and which agency and so forth, which of course you have to get to that level. But I think it's would be helpful to just say, let's start at the top as to what exactly we need to accomplish. And what, to take Biden at his word, they do want to hit the IPCC targets. They do want to do it in a way that creates good jobs. So we want to maximize that. And we want to do it in terms of just transition for the workers that are dependent and the communities that are dependent. I
Well,
mean, that stuff is simple.
it also seems to me to be a rare opportunity for bottom-up economic planning, partly because the federal government can't do all of this. It'll trip over itself. And partly because projects like yours that grew out of lots of discussions with local people who've been engaged in this effort for a long time mean that the actual project bubbles up from conversations with people who were engaged on the ground rather than being imposed by some infrastructure czar in Washington. So it's maybe a bit of a blessing that Washington is still kind of feeling its way for which department is in charge of what. And if you again analogize this to Roosevelt, I mean, the New Deal, which was quintessentially all these agencies with all these initials, was a reflection of the fact that Roosevelt never stopped experimenting. I
Yeah.
mean, he had lots of different public works agencies, and when one didn't work out, he would try another. It really wasn't until the war and the wartime emergency that you had a more coordinated kind of economic planning on behalf of the war effort. So it really is an opportunity for a conversation between local bottom-up planning, state government involvement, and the role of the feds providing the money with some criteria. And
I
I
think that's
think
right.
we,
I mean,
we
my experience just in the last several months, these various groups approached me about doing these studies. And at this point, it's like 6 or 7 different NGOs. They all commissioned me, and I'm doing different states and national and all this at the same time. And, these NGOs have done a lot of good work, and they've defined the projects on the ground, as you said. And they, certainly the ones in Appalachia, in Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, are adamant that they're going to define this. And so basically, all I did was kind of take their broad framework and kind of put it together and put numbers on it. So yeah, the infrastructure actually exists. I mean, if it exists in West Virginia, it exists in most states. And I've separately been doing this work with the so-called Green New Deal network in Washington. And I'm doing smaller state studies for 21 states. And it's this, similar process. And they know, they have a sense of what they want. They want somebody like me to kind of put it together and make sense of it. But they have had these discussions, and they are in touch with the state legislatures, regional planning organizations. So, I think there is a pretty good level of spade work having already been done. And so, yeah, if they actually know that there's money coming, then what has already been accomplished so far can bubble up and move forward.
well, having read the report, and I hope our readers read the report for themselves, but it also seems to me that your value added is to explain how all the pieces fit together, how
Yeah.
the energy goal and shift to renewable energy piece fits to the economic development piece, fits to the job creation piece, because it really does have to all work in sync as a coordinated plan, no?
Yeah. And of course, I'm not the only one doing it. I mean, I was part of this big project, for example, the Zero Emissions Action Plan that led by Jeff Sachs. And that has, I don't know, 15 different papers on different areas of specific policy. So, that work is out there. And there's another group at Princeton that did something that was similar, and theirs is broken down state by state. There's always a lot more work to do. And then I was in touch with this group yesterday in San Diego that's just San Diego specific. So they want to do something for the county. And apparently the county supervisors have now commissioned this. They're enthusiastic about it. And so the people I was talking to yesterday in San Diego, well, in San Diego, we have these XYZ criteria that are going to be different. For example, they were extremely hostile to the idea of utility scale solar. They wanted all rooftop solar, or at least artificial surfaces, which is more expensive than utility scale. But they were saying, yeah, but we don't care because we don't want to destroy property values with all these ugly solar farms. So those kinds of issues, I didn't know that until yesterday. But those kinds of issues will come up every single place, as they should. And the
And
fact that communities are discussing it is really valuable.
well, and I was going to say, the more that those decisions are made locally, the more legitimacy the entire project has. So let me ask you one last question. Um, Given all of the obvious benefits and the fact that there are benefits for business as well as for the environment, as well as for workers, and the fact that the economy is coming out of a horrific recession, um, based on your conversations, do you think the Republicans are going to be able to continue to just reject this categorically, or are some possibly going to appreciate the value of it?
I mean, you know, the Republicans, I mean, there's some of them that are just totally crazy, right? What can you say about these people? Um, they don't have any program.
Yeah, but you've got some Republican governors whose
Yeah,
constituents
that's
are
true.
hurting, who are.
Well, I mean, the governor of West Virginia, I don't know him, but I mean, his background, he was a Democrat briefly, apparently. You know, he's a very successful businessman. From a business standpoint, this program makes complete sense. So if he is Governor Jacobs, as I think he is, a rational businessman, um, he has to see this as an opportunity for the state. And why not get on board? Why not try to shape it in a way that he favors? I mean, and of course there's business opportunities. You know, declaring an interest. I myself am a very tiny green energy capitalist, and I myself am looking for investment possibilities in West Virginia. They will be there. I mean, one big area is the land reclamation. You know, you take you clean up the coal fields, and you can actually use the coal ash for industrial products. That's an opportunity. You know, it's not the easiest thing to do right now, but if it were subsidized, any, you know, just purely self-seeking capitalist should like that.
Well, this is just really important stuff, and I appreciate the work. I appreciate the conversation, and let's check in periodically as this goes forward, and let's hope that some of Biden's people take the time to read some of this.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you for your excellent article.
Thanks, Bob. Be well.
Okay.